However, the Planet X system does not orbit our Sun like a predictable freight train. Rather, it orbits our Sun much like an airplane, on 3 axes: longitudinal, lateral, and vertical. Consequently, its movements are far more complex. In fact, in being in it for this species, the guides tell us that it moves through the skies like nothing we've ever seen before. To help us put that in context, we need to see how the Planet X system orbits our own Sun relative to our own view of the Sun and the Planet X system. To do that, we must begin at the ecliptic. This blue line stretching across the screen represents the ecliptic, which in a manner of speaking could be referred to as the Sun's equator, or more accurately as the plane of our solar system. Imagine this blue line representing the ecliptic begins at a point in the very center of the Sun, and then stretches out in a concentric ring to the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Using the observation reports we've published in previous Yowza.com videos, let's now plot the movement of Nemesis, the brown dwarf at the core of the Planet X system, relative to our own Sun and the ecliptic as seen from Earth. Here's where our estimate of Nemesis was in 2010, based on the observations of Nibiru from 2010 to 2013. And here we see where Nemesis was observed in May of 2013. We used these 2 reference points to create a rudimentary orbital path based on the fact that Nemesis is in a 3,600-year-long elliptical orbit around our Sun. And here we see estimates of where Nemesis will be at the end of this year on the opposite side of the Sun. This explains why we cannot see it at this time. However, Nemesis will come out from behind the Sun as it reaches its point of perihelion, that point in its orbit where it comes closest to our own Sun. So with this background in mind, we're ready to take on the question: why are we not seeing the Planet X system in front of us and behind us each year? With that, let's return to our deep space view of our solar system. Like an airplane that flies on 3 axes, the Planet X system essentially does the same. While it is bobbing up and down, so to speak, it is also orbiting around the Sun as well, no differently than any of the other planets in our system. Again, remember that the guides have told us that the Planet X system moves through our skies like nothing else we've ever seen before. The bobbing up and down motion is straightforward, but in terms of moving sideways in orbit around the Sun, we need to look at the number of days it takes for the Planet X system to orbit our Sun, as it bobs up and down through our solar system. Let's begin with Earth, which we know takes 365 days to orbit the Sun. What the guides tell us is that even though the Planet X system is bobbing up and down, it also takes 380 days for this system to orbit around our Sun as well. Now we're ready to put it all together. To the left, we see a polar look-down view of Earth, Nemesis, and the Sun. To the right, we see a side view of our solar system from the ecliptic, with Earth on one side of the Sun and Nemesis on the other, which is why we cannot observe it at this time. Keeping that in mind, let's now change our point of view. To the left, we still have the look-down polar view, but to the right, we now have a frontal view as seen from Earth. Here we see Earth and Nemesis as they track around the Sun in 2010. In 2013, Earth is seen catching up because it has a shorter duration orbit around the Sun, and so Nemesis appears closer to the Sun. Here we see an approximation of where we presently are, with Nemesis being directly behind the Sun in 2014. And here we see Nemesis coming out from behind the Sun several months from now. And finally, here's where Earth will be relative to the Sun and Nemesis when Nemesis reaches its point of perihelion. To see the full range of motion, let's view a composite of all these points in space. Because Earth orbits the Sun every 365 days and Nemesis orbits the Sun every 380 days, Earth has slowly been gaining on Nemesis, and this is why the recent observations of Nemesis over the past few years have always placed it near the Sun from our point of view here on Earth. Nemesis is presently behind the Sun and unobservable at this time. But interestingly enough, we have current observations of its three planets, Helion, Buoys, and Nibiru, and we're going to show them to you in the next part of our program, Planet X Observations. In this segment, you're going to see observation images of three planets in the Planet X system captured with National Data Buoys Center buoys located in the Gulf of Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. However, before we show you these observations, we need to address two issues to help put these observations into proper context. First, a common complaint we receive from people who live in large metropolitan areas that they are unable to observe objects in the Planet X system for themselves. There are two principal reasons for this. They do not look in the right direction at the right time, but more often, even if they do, chemtrail aerosols make it impossible for them to see objects in the Planet X system. The other issue is the planet of Venus. Because these observations are near the Sun, a simplistic debunking tactic is to say we are looking at Venus. For this reason, before we show you the buoy images, we need to briefly discuss the phases of Venus so that you understand why this kind of simplistic debunking is false. Despite massive propaganda efforts by our government, a growing majority of Americans understand that chemtrail spraying is a real part of our lives. There are several reasons for it, and while some would think that the primary purpose is to make it more difficult to observe objects in the Planet X system, the two main reasons for chemtrail spraying are weather modification and crowd control. The atmosphere of our planet is drier with less overall moisture, which is why there are droughts and floods. Chemtrail spraying is being used to divert moisture from some areas to others for various reasons. This is the simple reason why we're seeing the extreme drought conditions in the western side of our country now. Moisture is being diverted eastward where it is needed for agriculture, mining, and manufacturing. These industries require great amounts of water, and chemtrail spraying is the functional answer to that need. If there was one thing the American government learned during the Vietnam War, was that an outraged citizenry can overpower the political aims of a few. It is why our leaders now add chemicals to the chemtrail mix to ensure our passivity and indifference. If the Americans of the 60s could see what is happening today, things would be vastly different. However, after a decade of being sprayed by chemicals that induce apathy, along with GMO foods and drugs like Prozac, people are dulled. Consequently, we're not alarmed by these weather modification efforts, which are substantial. However, more to the point here is that chemtrail aerosols are blocking the sky. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Not when you have mainstream media outlets like the New York Times publishing an op-ed titled "Blocking the Sky to Save the Earth," or Scientific American warning us that geoengineering could turn skies white, which in fact it has. To illustrate this fact, we'll use a simple simulation to show how chemtrail aerosols have impacted our ability to view the sky. Here we have a nice afternoon sky without aerosols. But after the spraying, the skies aloft become heavily masked. Here we have a twilight sky without aerosols. But now, as you can see, the chemtrail aerosols are falling to the ground as the air cools towards evening. Here we have a clear evening sky, such as what we would have seen before the advent of chemtrails. But now our evening skies are not as clear because the aerosols have finally reached the ground. Here we have a clear pre-dawn sky, such as what we would have seen in the days before chemtrails. However, these days much of the aerosols, sprayed the day before, have either settled to the ground or have mostly dispersed, and asking where that has gone to is a thorny question. Here we see the sun in the early morning, as seen from the buoys that captured the images we'll show you later on in this program. Keep this image in mind because this is the kind of clear sky that is being seen from these offshore buoys. On the other hand, this is more typical of the morning sky most Americans see today. So yes, chemtrails are blocking our view of the sky. This explains why we are able to show you excellent images of Planet X objects in pictures taken from offshore buoys. Given their locations at sea, they are mostly outside normal chemtrail spraying patterns. Also, these images were captured early in the morning, after the residual chemtrail aerosols in the area have either dissipated or have been blown away by prevailing winds. Chemtrails or not, you can still count on debunkers to say it's Venus. So let's take a quick look at the phases of Venus. The 7 image panels of objects in the Planet X system we'll present in this program were chosen for a specific reason. The phases of Venus, which you can learn about on Wikipedia. This is because one of the simplistic debunkings we often encounter because we're observing objects close to the Sun is that they are dismissed out of hand as being the planet Venus. So rather than taking our word for it, we want you to understand the phases of Venus so you can judge this for yourself as you review these images with us. In all 7 of the image panels we're going to show you, Venus is to the far right of the Sun in relationship to the ecliptic, that green line you see dotted through the screen. However, the key point here is that according to Wikipedia, Venus only presents a full image when it is on the opposite side of the Sun. Therefore, as we present buoy images from September 29, 2014 to October 12, 2014, we will show you images where Venus is to the right of the Sun in relationship to the ecliptic, along with a close-up of each observed object, so you can determine for yourself whether that object has a full or partial face. With that, we begin in the Bay of Alaska. The first 2 images we will present are from Station 46061 in the Bay of Alaska, between the Montague and Hinchinbrook Islands. Our first observation is for September 29, 2014, and in the panel at the top of the screen we see 5 images. These panel images are usually taken about an hour apart, and the timestamp usually refers to the last image in the panel, with the time being noted in UTC. Here, our image of interest is second from the right. This object appears to the left of the Sun from the horizon, where Venus is much further over to the right of the Sun. However, when you look at this object in the lower left-hand panel, it clearly shows a full face. Next is an image captured on September 30, 2014, and it is in the center of the panel. Here, Venus is a good distance from the Sun, although both objects are to the right of the Sun from the horizon. Yet once again, we clearly see an object with a full face.